I turned 25 recently, and in my 3 years of working, I've saved well into my 6 figures. Today, I want to share 4 money mindset tips that I use to put myself in the best possible financial position for the future. I want to say that I am lucky that after college, I managed to land a tech job, but I think that these mindset shifts are helpful for anyone regardless of how much money you make. My first tip is to keep your overhead expenses as low as possible. Overhead expenses are basically the absolutely necessary recurring costs we have on a month-to-month basis in order to live. For many of us, the main ones include rent, utilities, food, and transportation expenses. But if you keep your overhead expenses low, you have more flexibility around your spending. You can choose to save or invest in your future. You can choose to eat out more if that gives you more utility. But all in all, you have liquid cash that you can choose to spend however you need as compared to absolutely needing to allocate it to a non-adjustable expense like rent or transportation. For me, since graduating college, I've tried to live in the cheapest apartments I could find. I just figured that coming out of college, I've lived in a dorm room with a roommate. I've lived in a house with my own room, but a shared bathroom. So my standards were pretty low coming out of college. And if I could keep my standards low, I could hold off on lifestyle creep for as long as possible. And I get that when we're making money, we want to live a better life. I think that there are trade-offs we can make to keep our living expenses low while still getting what we want. For example, coming out of college, I really wanted my own apartment. Obviously, that's a little bit more expensive than living with a roommate, but I compromised on that by living in an older apartment and not necessarily in the center of all the action. So I still got what I wanted, which was living alone, and I found as cheap of an option as possible in that realm. And it ended up being cheaper than if I were to live with roommates. With transportation, for example, does it make sense to take public transportation where you live? Or can you maybe largely rely on public transportation and rent a car for when you need it? And that way you don't have to pay for a monthly parking fee, insurance, and car maintenance fees. There might be ways to think outside of the box and still get what you need and still save on overhead expenses. My next tip is to pay yourself first. Right when you get your paycheck, you should funnel as much as you can afford into paying off your high interest debts if you have any. If you have none, you should make sure that you have 3 to 6 months of your living expenses saved up as an emergency fund. And once you have that, you might consider funneling your money into retirement accounts. So this might be 401ks, IRAs, anything of that sort. And with what's left over after I allocate everything to their associated accounts, then that's the money I use for social and material expenses. And that brings me to my next point, which is don't feel obligated to attend social engagements. One thing that I've really learned to prioritize is spending my time and money in ways that really make me feel happy and fulfilled. For example, if someone asks me to hang out, I make sure that investing my time in this person will leave me walking away feeling more happy and fulfilled than if I didn't spend my time with them. Because even beyond the pressure of spending money in social situations, we will have to spend time. And if I don't enjoy myself, why would I spend this non-renewable resource on an interaction where I know that I would get more utility out of doing something else? And that something else could be hanging out with another friend or doing errands so I can relax later. With this mindset, we make sure that we spend time with people we truly value, and we're more intentional with the people we choose to surround ourselves with. My next tip is to make your money work for you. And by this, I mean to basically invest any extra cash you have that isn't in your emergency savings account because you want to have quick access to that. Personally, I invest the bulk of my money in an ETF that tracks the S&P 500 and then I leave it. And if you don't know, the S&P 500 is basically a stock market index that tracks the stock performance of the 500 biggest US companies. I might check my brokerage account every so often, but whether the market is up or it's down, I don't think too much about it because I'm putting my money in for the long term. This is the money where if in 5 to 10 years, I want to buy a home, maybe take a sabbatical, maybe I want to travel for a little bit, I have options because my money has been accumulating in the stock market. And maybe I never spend this chunk of money and I instead use it to retire early. For me personally, this gives me more pleasure than buying material items because I know that when I save my money and I invest it, I'm giving myself options in the future. If I anticipate needing a chunk of money in 6 months to a year, I wouldn't invest it. I would put it in a high yield savings account, which is where I also keep my emergency fund. I personally use Ally Bank, which I'm not sponsored by, and the interest rate for Ally Bank or many high yield savings banks, changes quite frequently, but it's far better than any traditional bank savings account. So my traditional bank savings account, I use Bank of America, I think it's 0.1%. Ally Bank's high yield savings account interest rate, I think as of July 2023, is 4%. 4% is just about the rate of inflation as of July 2023. So I know at least the value of my money remains the same if I keep it in a high yield savings account. And this is compared to my traditional bank savings account where my money will lose value over time because the rate of inflation is 4%, which is higher than 0.1%. I also want to note that when I invest my money, I don't put myself in a position where I would have to make financial decisions when I'm emotionally charged. This means that if I pick individual stocks, which I do a little bit, I don't bet more than I could afford to lose. I don't day trade or value invest because I know that I'd have to follow the news very closely. I'd have to pore over multiple financial documents of prospective companies that I might invest in. I'd have to not only buy at the right time, but sell at the right time. So I'd have to essentially execute very well, regardless of whether I made or lost large amounts of money. I know I probably don't have that capability, which is why I stick to the good old dollar cost averaging into an ETF. Each time I'm met with the choice of whether to save or spend, basically, I just weigh the options. If it would give me more utility to spend money now and give me more joy to my day, then I will happily spend money. But I do remind myself that every dollar I don't spend now that I do invest will be more money in the future. For example, a croissant with a coffee here in New York costs around $10 these days. With an 8% compounded growth, which has been the average annual returns of the S&P 500 for the last 50 years. So 8% compounded growth over 20 years, basically this $10 turns into $45. And it might not seem like that much money, but these individual choices we make throughout our days do add up. So if I need a pick-me-up, then I'll happily treat myself. But if I know that it's not as important for me in that moment, then I'll hold off until next time. And this is easy for me to do because I keep my end goal in sight. I'd love the option to retire early if I want to, or invest in real estate. Basically, just be in a position where I don't have to trade my time for money. The best way I know how to do that right now is to be smart with my money. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and you might also enjoy this video here where I talk about how to build wealth in your 20s to be a millionaire in your 30s.